The smell of mold and wet leaves was the only constant on Willow Street, a forgotten artery where the lamps of the city of Arcadia seemed to hesitate before igniting. Elias, the archivist, wasn't looking for constancy. He was looking for fissures, the small lapses in coherence within the fabric of time. It was past 3 in the morning, and the fine rain made the glass of the registry room weep. Elias stood with his back to the door, hunched over the Book of Absences, a volume bound in sichas, something that resembled human leather but smelled of mothballs and ash. The book didn't catalog missing people. It listed places that had suddenly never existed: a public garden, a market, an entire street. A newly added line in the tome caught his attention, written in sepia ink that seemed to squirm. It read, 4th Street, Central Block 127, annulled. Date, yesterday. Elias felt a coldness, not of temperature, but of recognition. 127 was the building of Mrs. Ilara, the baker who sold him the strangest scones in Arcadia, the ones that tasted of smoke and distant memories. He had been there yesterday. The building existed. Dropping the book as if it had bitten his hand, Elias rushed to the window, peering into the fog that swallowed the houses. There was nothing. 4th Street, in the direction of the central block, ended abruptly in a brick wall that had always been there. Always. He pressed his hand to his chest. Mrs. Ilara's absence was not merely the loss of a place. It was proof that the scar, the border between Arcadia and the other side, had just widened. And as usual, he was the only one to notice. Elias drew the curtains shut, stifling the gray light of dawn. 4th Street was gone. The Book of Absences was always right, and that was the most terrifying truth of all. His first instinct wasn't escape, but documentation. If the memory of a place was the only thing keeping it real, he had to ensure Mrs. Ilara's memory wouldn't fade. He retrieved a faded map of Arcadia from a safe. Not an official city map, but a map of whispers, hand-drawn generations ago, with areas marked in red where reality was known to be thin. He searched for 4th Street. The exact location of Block 127 wasn't marked in red, but rather encased in an ancient symbol, resembling an incomplete spiral. The scar. His next stop was inevitable. The nocturnal watchmaker. Leaving the registry, Elias traversed Arcadia, ignoring the cold that seemed to infiltrate the bones, not the archivaru skin. He arrived at Pendulum Alley, where a cramped, nameless shop sold time instruments that seemed not to measure this age. Inside, a bell chimed with a sound that seemed to come from underwater. The watchmaker, named Silos, was almost a legend. It was said that he didn't sell clocks, but rather minutes that had been diverted from their course. Silos didn't look up. He was bent over a microscopic gear, his breath vaporizing in the cold air. "Mrs. Ilara," Elias began, his voice low and urgent, from Central Block 127. I needed to know if... Silos lifted his head. His eyes were a pale blue, almost white, and seemed to register time backward. If who or what used to be in that place is still there. But somewhere else, Silos finished, his voice a dry, sandy whisper. Yes, I remember her. And no, Elias, she is not in another place. She is in nowhere. And nowhere is getting closer to you. Silos wiped his fingers on a flannel cloth, his gaze fixed on the map of whispers that Elias held. Your curiosity is the only anchor you have left. But anchors sink, boy, especially when the tide is made of darkness. Silos' words, "Nowhere is getting closer to you," reverberated in Elias's mind, turning into a cold mantra. The watchmaker had given him something more valuable than time. The motive. He couldn't save the world, but perhaps he could save a memory, a sliver of reality that Mrs. Ilara represented. At noon, the sun struggled to penetrate Arcadia's clouds, but the light reaching 4th Street was weak and sickly. The brick wall, now the absolute end of the street, radiated an unnatural quiet. Other children played down the street. Dogs barked in places that still existed, but no one looked at the wall. To them, it had always been there. Elias approached it. The brick was rough under his fingers, but the cold wasn't that of cement. It was the cold of void. He ran his hand over the area where Mrs. Ilara's bakery door should have been. There was no trace of faded paint. No smell of cinnamon. Not even a fissure in the mortar to suggest its removal. It had been erased, not demolished. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the damp air. He tried to summon the smell of the scones, the sound of the small copper bell that announced his entry. Nothing. The memory was struggling to survive. He opened his hand where he held a small item. A small mother-of-pearl button that Silos had given him before he left. A dead weight for when reality feels too light. Elias pressed it against the brick at the exact location of block 127. There was an amplified silence. The sound of the wind vanished. Distant barks stopped. The outside world seemed to have been switched off. And then he felt it. The brick under the button was no longer solid. It was elastic, hot and cold at the same time, as if he were touching a dormant muscle. The incomplete spiral from the map of whispers pulsed in his mind. This was not a wall. It was a membrane. Elias pushed. With the sound of tearing paper, Elias's hand sank in up to his wrist. The vision that presented itself was that of nowhere, a swirling charcoal-colored fog with flashes of light that weren't light, but the absence of shadow. He pulled his hand out, his skin tingling as if it had been washed in holy water. The hole in the wall sealed instantly, leaving only a faint shimmer in the mortar. He stood at the border, and the other side was calling him. The tingling in Elias's hand persisted, a vivid reminder of the invading wall's elasticity. He stumbled back, retreating from 4th Street as if fleeing an invisible fire. The impulse to return to the registry and pretend nothing happened was strong, but the image of the charcoal-colored fog in nowhere was more real than the bricks surrounding him. The mother-of-pearl button slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the pavement with a dry sound. When he picked it up, he noticed the pearlescent white had darkened, absorbing the blackness of the membrane it had touched. He returned to Pendulum Alley. The small bell on Silos' shop did not chime this time. Only a deep silence greeted him. Silos was in the same spot, working on a minuscule piece, but his head lifted before Elias could speak. "You returned sooner than I expected," the watchmaker said without surprise. "Nowhere seduces. It is the purest void, the opposite of Arcadia. That's why you cannot recall the scones." Elias leaned against the doorframe. "What is in there? Is it... Where do they go?" Silos sighed, a sound that seemed to scrape against time. When Arcadia's reality tires of a place, it annuls it. That place isn't destroyed. It is pushed to the other side of the membrane. Nowhere is the dead archive of everything Arcadia has rejected. And everything rejected turns bitter. Silos paused his work, setting down his loop. Ilara is not their whole, only the echo of her. She is a memory trapped in a dimension without memories. How do I bring her back? Or at least the proof that she existed? Elias felt his voice shake with frustration and deep fear. Silos smiled, but the smile did not reach his pale eyes. Arcadia needs a fixed point, a piece of reality to cling to. The button helped you open the door, but you will need something more, something that has never existed in Arcadia. The watchmaker held out a small object. Not a clock, but a compass without hands. It was made of dark glass and had a single symbol inscribed, the incomplete spiral. "This does not point north, Elias. It points to the inward. It will guide you to what is real to you in nowhere." "But there is a condition," Silos warned, his eyes growing more serious. "Nowhere will only return what you stole. You take a piece of Arcadia to the other side, and you must leave a piece of yourself in exchange." Elias looked at the compass, feeling its cold, ironic weight in his palm. His sanity was about to be tested, and he would have to pay the price. He had to go. Elias returned to the registry room, which now felt strangely normal and vulnerable. The weak light from his desk lamp painted long shadows on the wooden floor. He closed the door, the quiet of the registry acting as a temporary balm against the madness outside. The compass without hands rested upon the Book of Absences, its dark spirals absorbing the light. Silos had said he needed a small piece of Arcadia to cross, and that he would have to leave something in return. What did Elias value more than his sanity? He had no family. His life was made of records, dates, and papers. His gaze fell upon a small oak cabinet. Inside, in a private niche, he kept his most precious possession, a faded black and white photograph. It was of him, around 10 years old, standing next to his grandmother, the only person who had ever seen him beyond his function as an archivist. His grandmother had died years ago, and the photo was his only tangible proof of human connection and warmth. A fixed point. He had to take the invading photograph. If nowhere was the dead archive, his goal was to prove that love and memory could not be annulled. Now, The price. Silos had said, "Leave a piece of yourself in exchange." Elias returned to the Book of Absences. With a tremor in his hand, he opened the book to a blank page and wrote, in the same squirming sepia ink, name: Elias Vance, the archivist. Central Block 14, Arcadia Registry. Date: imminent. He was recording his own disappearance. By doing so, he wasn't losing his place, but offering it to the membrane. He grabbed his paraffin lantern, the map of whispers, and the compass. He placed the photograph in the inner pocket of his coat, close to his heart. His sacrifice was made. It was not an object, but his very existence in Arcadia. He returned to 4th Street. Night was deep now, and the fog had turned into a dense, mottled blanket of darkness. The brick wall stood silent. With the compass without hands in his hand, Elias approached. This time, there was no hesitation. He pressed the mother-of-pearl button and the compass against the brick. The sound of tearing paper was deafening, and the cold of the void nearly stole his breath. Elias took a step forward, surrendering himself to the opening. He did not cross a doorway, but a wave of cold, dense air. The last thing he saw of Arcadia was his shadow being swallowed by the darkness, and the last thing he felt was the weight of his own name being erased from the book. He was in nowhere. Elias landed in silence. It was not the silence of sound's absence. It was the silence of memory's absence. The air was thick, cold, and paradoxically light, like breathing ashes. The paraffin lantern, which worked perfectly in Arcadia, flickered here with a bluish, insufficient light. He stood on what appeared to be 4th Street, but there was no pavement, only a floor of black glass that reflected the nothingness above. The horizon was a charcoal-colored haze, dotted with shapes that looked like buildings but were transparent, like drawings made by an uncertain hand. He consulted the compass without hands. The dark glass circle did not move, but the incomplete spiral engraved in its center began to pulse softly, an internal rhythm that only Elias could feel. The compass pointed to his inward, and his inward pointed to a phantom facade materializing in the haze just a few meters away. It was Central Block 127. The building had no color. It was a monochromatic sketch of what should be. The windows were just black holes, and the door where Mrs. Alara's bakery should open was there, but it looked like it was made of dense smoke. Elias approached cautiously. The compass guided him. His inward remembered. On the black glass floor in front of number 127 lay a small copper bell on its side. It was the bell that announced the entrance of customers to Mrs. Alara's bakery. Elias picked it up. The bell was cold, but the inner surface exhaled a faint, almost imperceptible smell of cinnamon and smoke. Elias felt a pang in his chest, not of sadness, but of bitter hope. It was then that the silence was broken, not by a sound, but by its absence. One of the transparent buildings, about 20 meters to his right, suddenly began to disappear. Not fading, but simply being erased from nowhere. And where the building had been, a figure appeared. It was tall, slender, and made of nothing but agitated shadows like cold smoke. Its center was a deep void, but its shape suggested the robes of a man. The shadow figure made no noise, but Elias heard it in his head like a dry, sharp whisper. "Vance, you brought something into the dead archive, and the debt must be paid." The rejected, the entities guarding nowhere, had found him, and they wanted his fixed point. The dry whisper in Elias's mind was like sandpaper scraping his brain. The debt must be paid. Elias did not hesitate. He knew a direct confrontation against an entity made of absence would be suicidal. He, Gasso, clutched the copper bell in his hand, his only physical proof that Mrs. Alara's bakery had existed. He turned and ran. The black glass floor was slippery, but he did not look back. The compass without hands vibrated in his palm, the soft warmth of Elias's inward competing with the cold of nowhere. The rejected, the shadow figure, did not run. It simply glided, closing the distance quickly, distorting the transparent shapes of the buildings as it passed. The worst part wasn't the speed, but the omissivia, total silence of its movement, which made the pursuit terrifying. Elias reached the smoke door of Block 127 and plunged through it. There was no latch, no hinges, no door. The sensation was that of diving into icy water, and Elias's vision blurred. When his perception returned, he was in a monochromatic living room. It was not the bakery. It was an apartment, an exact copy of what should have been the building's interior. A phantom sofa, ethereal tables, all without color, without smell, without substance. It looked like the negative photograph of a life. Outside, the silhouette of the rejected stopped at the entrance. The entity could not cross. The void respects the boundaries it creates itself, Elias thought, recalling Silos's words. The bakery had been annulled, but the limits of its structure still existed as a kind of rule in nowhere. He was safe for now. Elias raised the flickering lantern. The air inside was colder. The room was empty, save for one thing. In the center of the room, where a fireplace should be, stood a rustic wooden table. It was the only object with color, the dark, rich brown of living wood. On the table lay a small closed music box. It was not made of smoke or black glass. It was polished ebony. Next to the box, a note, written in the same squirming sepia ink from the Book of Absences, read, "The fixed point will only guide you if its echo is freed. Nowhere detests incomplete memory. Where is the smell of smoke and memories?" Elias picked up the music box. It was incredibly heavy. There was no key, only a small concavity on its lid. He looked at the copper bell in his hand and then at the concavity of the box. The rejected from outside began emitting a sound in Elias's mind, louder this time, more urgent. "No, do not complete the archive. I want your connection." Elias understood. Nowhere didn't want the object he brought, the photo. It wanted the memory it represented. To rescue Mrs. Ilara's memory, he would have to use his own memory as the key. The copper bell in Elias's hand, the one belonging to Mrs. Ilara's bakery door, was the last trace of scent and warmth he had from the world he lost. The rejected, just outside the phantom doorway, sent waves of silence into Elias's mind, attempting to break his concentration. Surrender. Nowhere will take your memory. It is its right. Elias ignored the whisper. He looked at the ebony music box and then at the bell. The bell was not a key, but the fixed point of the bakery itself. With slightly trembling hands, Elias fitted the base of the bell into the concavity of the box. There was an audible gasp, but not from the rejected. It seemed to come from the box itself. The bell settled perfectly. Immediately, color returned to the music box, and its surfaces gained the warm sheen of polished wood. The box's lid slowly opened. Instead of a ballerina or a miniature orchestra, the box contained a single tiny rolling pin, and as the rolling pin turned, a melody began to play. It wasn't music, but a perfect sonic recreation. The sound of fire crackling in the bakery oven, the gentle clinking of crockery, and underneath it all, the unmistakable, warm and dense aroma of cinnamon and smoke. The smell was an assault on the void. It filled the phantom living room with a reality so intense that the transparent chairs and ethereal sofa began to flicker violently. The rejected, outside, let out a silent scream that almost brought Elias to his knees. "You are stealing the archive. You are completing it." The sound of reality returning was a balm, but also a weapon. When the melody finished, the wall behind the wooden table, which should have been a bedroom, dissolved. It didn't fade, but rather reorganized into a new passage. Behind it was Mrs. Ilara's bakery. It was small but incredibly real. The wooden shelves were filled with phantom scones. The counter was clean, and the brick oven at the back radiated a warmth that Elias felt on his skin. And at the Agaimas counter, hunched over a recipe book, was Mrs. Ilara. She was not made of shadow or smoke, but was a soft gray hue, like an old memory printed on rice paper. She looked intact. "Elias Vance, the archivist," she said, without lifting her head. Her voice was the sound of 2 scones being broken open, warm and familiar. "I knew my fixed point would call you, but you have little time. They will come for you here." Mrs. Ilara's warning, "They will come for you here," barely had time to echo. Outside, the doorway leading to the phantom living room, Elias heard the silence ripped by a different sound. A silent fury vibrating in the air. The rejected were closing in. "How do I take you back?" Elias asked, his voice low and urgent, his hand on his coat, near his grandmother's photograph. Mrs. Ilara finally lifted her head from the notebook. Her eyes, warm brown in Elias's memory, were now a soft grayish purple. She smiled, a grin full of acceptance and resignation. "Oh, Elias, you cannot take me. I am not real. I am a complete image of reality. If you take me, My memory in Arcadia would be overwhelming and would erase yours. I am its fixed point here. Yours is the one that needs to survive there." She pushed her recipe notebook across the counter. It was bound in leather, its yellowed pages spotted with notes and cinnamon stains. Open at the central page was the master recipe for the scones that tasted of smoke and distant memories. "This is the proof, the essence of my place." "Of Block 127, she said. "To take the recipe is to take the reality that nowhere could not corrupt. It is the true fixed point of Arcadia." Elias took the notebook. It was surprisingly heavy, cold to the touch, but the writing seemed to squirm. Alive. "But the price?" Elias looked at his hand, where the compass without hands vibrated stronger. "I recorded my absence in the book, and Silos said I had to leave something in return." "What do I leave?" The rejected outside now managed to extend a shadow hand through the living room passage. The hand moved toward the bakery, attempting to crush the cinnamon aroma. "You leave your fixed point," Mrs. Ilara whispered, pointing to his coat pocket. "The photograph. You leave the proof of your strongest human connection." "Nowhere craves memories, Elias. To take mine, you must renounce yours." Elias hesitated. If he lost the photograph, he would lose his only proof that his grandmother had existed. He would be merely the archivist, a man without a past. The copper bell on the music box began to vibrate violently. Elias made his decision. With a quick, painful tug, he pulled the photograph from his inner pocket. The faded image of his grandmother and a young Elias seemed to glow in the gloom. He placed it on the counter. The moment the photograph touched the counter, Mrs. Ilara faded. She did not disintegrate. She merged with the counter, becoming a patch of gray color that disappeared into the wood grain. Her last whisper in Elias's mind was a warm, "Go, my dear. Your proof is all that remains." Nowhere reacted. The rejected shadow at the door retracted its hand. Instead of advancing, it bent over the photograph, absorbing it with a ravenous silence. The entity did not want the paper. It wanted the feeling. Elias grabbed the master recipe notebook and the compass without hands, turning towards the back door of the bakery. His path forward was closed, but the path for escape was open. With the cold, living weight of the master recipe notebook in his hands, Elias stumbled toward the back door of the bakery. The smell of cinnamon quickly faded, and the outlines of the room began to flicker again, ready to be reabsorbed by the void. The back door did not lead to an alley, but to the dead archive itself. Elias found himself in a hallway without walls or ceiling, where the black glass floor continued. Thousands of silent, transparent objects floated in the charcoal haze, phantom copies of lost bicycles, unsent letters and fragments of forgotten sentences. Nowhere was trying to swallow him. The rejected, now absorbing the essence of the grandmother's photograph, did not pursue him. It was satisfied with the sacrifice, but the void itself was the threat. Elias linked the compass without hands to the recipe notebook. The compass stopped vibrating to the inward and began to spin slowly, like a needle searching for magnetic north. It was pointing toward reality. The fixed point of Arcadia in his hand was pulling him home. He ran. He ran through the landscape of absence, ignoring the whispers that now came from everywhere. Just another void. Stay with us, Elias. There is no reason to return. The compass indicated a spot in the fog. Elias ran toward it and once again pressed the master recipe notebook against the void. The sound of tearing paper was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. He stumbled, returning to Arcadia's 4th Street. Night was still deep. The brick wall was there, but it no longer radiated the cold of the void. His return had closed the door. Elias ran, panting, back to Willow Street. He reached the location where the Arcadia registry should have been. There was nothing. The registry building hadn't been annulled, but the memory that Elias worked there had. Where his office stood, there was now a building supply store, which had always been there. His name had been erased from the book. His sacrifice had been accepted. With his heart tight with the loss of his identity, Elias stumbled into Pendulum Alley. The small bell of Silos' shop chimed. The watchmaker, Silos, was cleaning his loops. He didn't look up. "You returned order to the archive, Elias Vance," Silos said, "but nowhere claimed its price. Your place in Arcadia exists no more. You are an outsider, an echo." Elias placed the master recipe notebook on the counter. "Mrs. Ilara, the recipe is proof that she existed." Silos opened the book. Yes, this is pure reality. And now, Elias, you are the only one who knows. Your mission is not over. You are now the guardian of the scar. You will watch the membrane, record the absences, and keep the memories alive. Elias felt the weight of the notebook in his hand and the emptiness in his heart. He had lost his grandmother twice and his identity once. Silos finally looked up. And your payment. It is your new fixed point, something that Arcadia needs and only you can give. Elias Vance, the annulled archivist, looked at the notebook. He had the proof, but he was alone. The sound of the fine rain returned, and the smell of mold and wet leaves was once again his only constant. He was a man without a record, in a city of forgetting, with the key to all that was real in his hands, and his new life had just begun.